All right, so welcome to the Alpha Human Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Rosenberg, and our guest today is Dr. Shawn Baker. Dr. Baker is a multi-sport elite level athlete with multiple world records in rowing. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He served in the US Airforce as a nuclear weapons launch officer and as a combat trauma surgeon and chief of orthopedics while deployed to Afghanistan. Dr. Baker is also the face of the Carnivore Diet movement. He's the founder and CEO of MeatRx, and this is an organization that educates and promotes the benefits of an all-meat diet. He recently published a definitive title on the subject, The Carnivore Diet, and he is the host, or the co-host, I should say, of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. Dr. Baker, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lawrence, thanks for that great introduction. It's my pleasure to be here, and I look forward to this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. I think I pulled you away from one of your animalistic workouts over there.
Well, I actually got everything I wanted to do done, so I timed it just right. I literally jumped off a pull-up bar 1 minute before we started, so I got all the things I wanted to do done. So no, you didn't pull me away from anything. It's just good time management.
Cool.
A little on my part.
Fantastic. Okay, so Dr. Baker, you are the thought leader, if you will, for an improbable health movement that just a few years ago would have seemed absolutely absurd. I mean, an all-meat diet or a diet made up of exclusively animal products. I mean, given all the bad press meat and eggs have gotten over the past few decades and how it should be highly restricted within any diet, according to all the major health associations, from the ADA, the American Diabetes Association, to the American Heart Association. It is a movement that you would have thought would not be very popular, and yet it is gaining more and more momentum every day over the past few years. And you, more than any other individual, have been the most instrumental proponent in publicizing the idea that this is not only a healthy way to eat, but that you will actually thrive on a carnivore diet. How in the world did all of this come about? I mean, how did you become the face of this movement?
Well, I mean, I don't think it was by design. I think there was some serendipity there. I mean, I think that, just as a physician, you get frustrated seeing, patient after patient after patient. We have this system that doesn't work very well, and it's just this chronic disease epidemic. And, I was always, as an athlete my whole life, I thought, well, I just train hard. And, then when I got into my mid-40s, I'm in my mid-50s now. When I got in my mid-40s, I, started to see my health decline. And so I said, well, this doesn't make sense. I'm doing everything right. I'm eating a relatively healthy diet, but I really had to experiment diet. And so I did that. And then as I got better at it, and saw my health improve dramatically, going with different variations of diet, and finally this sort of carnivorous diet, I did it as kind of just an experiment, a 30-day experiment. I'd seen some other people doing it, having success with it. I, at this point had understood enough about nutrition, or more realistically, the lack of knowledge that we have in nutrition. I mean, our nutrition science just in general is not very good science. It's not a very strong science. It's not really very scientific, quite honestly. I mean, we don't have real experiments. We have, really kind of weak data, and we sort of infer a lot of stuff, and that really doesn't get it at the end of the day. At the end of the day, when we're looking for results, we need results-based science, and we don't have that in nutrition for the most part, for certainly for long-term stuff. And so having sort of, read enough to sort of question the nutritional paradigms, I said, well, what's the harm? I mean, I like steaks. I like steak and eggs. I did it for 30 days, and lo and behold, I didn't die. I didn't get scurvy. My heart didn't stop. My colon didn't fall out, and I felt as good as I could remember feeling in many decades. And so, for my personal experiments, once the 30 days was over, I said, well, that was fun. That was neat. I went back to a more regular inclusive diet, and I just didn't feel as good. I just started seeing all things start hurting again. My digestion's not as good. My energy's not as good. So I rapidly said, I like feeling good. I like performing good. Call me crazy, but those are the things that, I enjoy as a human being. And so I went back on it, and now I'm 3.5 years into this diet, and, for whatever, and I think the fact that I'm an MD and I'm an athlete and I'm not a wallflower. I mean, I'm not afraid to speak my mind. I'm not afraid to push back against people. I'm a competitive person. I've been that way my whole life. I like to win. And, there's some, obviously some bias in what I do, but, more importantly, I just, I'm results based. I said, I don't care what your theory is. I don't care what you're in for, what you think is true. I want to know what actually happens when people do a certain thing. We've never, on a meat-based diet, outside of, certain, indigenous populations and an isolated study, 100 years ago, we've never really tested it to say, this is going to be bad. What we do is we look at the standard American diet and we realize that, there's some meat in there, and therefore, meat is a root cause of all the problems. And that's just really, really bad science. I can't emphasize enough. It is bad science in nutrition. And so what happens when people say, well, let's see what happens. Let's do the experiment. And let's see what happens when I only eat meat. And by and large, for the most part, people notice they get healthier. They get objectively, subjectively, and almost without exception, healthier. There's a very few people that don't see an improvement, when they go to this diet, particularly if they're on, the standard diet. And I think, what this shows to me, in contrast to what the plant-based sort of advocates believe, is that, there's something else in the diet. Call me crazy, but maybe this novel food, this, the Twinkies, the Doritos, the processed food, the seed oils, the high fructose corn syrup that we've introduced into the human diet over the last 100 or so years, is maybe that's the culprit for the modern disease epidemics of chronic disease we're seeing. And it's not a food we've been eating as a species for, as Homo sapiens for 300, 400,000 years, and as humans, going back to Homo habilis, maybe 3 million years. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't even pass the common sense test. And so, we couple that with really poor science or lack of science, and a very heavily financed and, special interest. Well, what do you call it? Special interest. It's a broad global interest in keeping us on a grain-based diet, keeping us on a highly processed, highly profitable diet, to the detriment of the population at large. Like I said, people, they mollify people. Here's some calories, and we'll sprinkle some sugar on it so it tastes good, and you just shut up and enjoy your, your Cheerios, and we'll give you we'll put you on your Lipitor when the time comes, and that's not right. And so I think more and more people. I think the other thing is that social media is new. Relatively. From when I am by no means the first guy ever recommended an all-meat diet. This has been going back hundreds of years. And you can go back to Salisbury, you can go back to the 1700s, you can go back all through the 1900s, 20th century. All kinds of people have recommended this diet, and with success. It's just that now we have the means by which to involve a lot more people and show the results. And, it's hard to, take a picture of somebody. This guy's 340 pounds and obese and sick, and now he's 190 pounds and lean and happy. That you see it over and over again. At some point, you say that's not a placebo effect. People say, well, it's calorie reduction, or it's just getting rid of processed food, or it's just because there's more protein, or just because of this and that and that. And I say, I don't really care what you think the reason is. At the end of the day, it works, and that's what we should be concerned ourselves with. We should look at things that work for people and not be afraid to do that because of some unprovable theory about what you might die of when you're 78. It's just, we just don't have the science to make that decision. And so I think we have to go with what we can objectively demonstrate in the short term.
So very powerful. I think if I look back, I started following you on Twitter in 2017, and I'd never heard of the carnivore diet before, or an all meat diet. And what I had heard of was, because I'm an avid bodybuilding fan, and I know back in the day Vince Gironda, he was an advocate for the steak and eggs diet, and That was like one of the staples of helping his clients get ripped back in the 50s and the 60s. So clearly something was going on back then. As you said, this isn't something that's new, but it's interesting because when I followed you, and you were coming up with all these really interesting data points and talking about how you're eating, 4 to 6 pounds of ribeyes a day. And at that point I was keto, and I was chasing ketones, eating big giant, Marxist primal diets. What does he call that? The big effing salad.
Yeah, big ass salad. Yeah.
Big effing salad with tons of MCT oil and olive oil in it, and I wasn't getting that much protein because I was chasing the ketones, and slowly but surely, I was an avid runner at the time, and slowly but surely, what you were saying made so much sense. I had been a bodybuilder for years before this, and I just got the bug again, and I started eating meat. And I started with steak and eggs, and and because you deal with people who tell you this all the time, one of your first sites was Meat Heals, and you get all those all that anecdotal evidence. But I felt all of a sudden like I had superpowers. Started putting on muscle. I could run longer. I looked great. I was getting more muscle tone again. Slowly but surely, I ended up going full carnivore. And the one time I broke that rule for about 2 or 3 months and went back on having lots of nuts and lots more oil, I gained about probably 12 pounds of fat. And so the one thing, where I'm getting to is what I found in my journey was that a lot of chasing ketones was about fasting. And I got into a habit of fasting. And what I wanted to ask you is, because I notice you don't fast, you feast, as you call it. But I'm really curious, what are your thoughts on restricting calories for health, for having that edge, mental clarity versus eating an all meat diet, say without fasting, taking in the extra calories and the extra protein? I'm really curious as to what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, and that's a great question. There's a lot of nuance and context that has to go into that particular question. So when we talk about restricting calories, you can take it from I'm eating excess calories to now I'm eating an appropriate amount to I'm under eating. And I think you have to make that distinction first of all. Most people, and I know people complain about in a low carb space if you mention the word calorie, but I do think there are many people that just eat too damn much, and whether it's fat, whether it's carbohydrates, whether it's food in general. And I think some of that has to do with the way we, a lot of our food, our hyper palatable, ultra processed food, if we're eating that clearly drives us to overeat. I think that, meal frequency can play into that. We have this snacking mentality. I do think infrequent meals. And when I talk about feasting, that also implies some sort of physiological fast occurs, because when you eat to satiety and you eat satiating, nutritionally appropriate food, you shouldn't be hungry later, an hour later, or 2 hours later, for the most part. And that generally happens for most people. I think that, again, most people, when they do a carnivorous diet, particularly if they're coming from, a standard American diet or something like that, will find that the meat is so satiating. It stimulates CCK or peptide YY or one of these other, leptin or one of the other hormones that sort of feed back on appetite, to the degree that they tend to eat an appropriate amount of calories. I think protein is a good thing. I think most people eat not enough protein. I think the RDA requirements are the bare minimum to not die, but it doesn't do anything for preserving or building lean muscle mass. I think we way undereat protein in the United States. Average protein consumption somewhere between 12 and 16%, depending on who you see. I think that number is probably more appropriately up around at least 30%, and then possibly higher if your goal is to put on a lot of muscle. I think that, fasting, and I call it, and I make a distinction between physiologic fasting, I'm just not hungry and therefore I'm not going to eat, versus I'm setting a stopwatch. I think that's a little bit diet dependent. I think a meat-based diet, most people do that naturally anyway. I think there are some people that will benefit from that external cue. I think some people, even in the context of a meat-based diet, and I say this, having seen this, experienced this, talk to people to do this, they can overeat meat. I mean, it is possible to do. I know it's harder, but it is. I think that some of the problems we get into when we look at things like diabetic pathophysiology, I think that ultimately comes into at the very core of what its nature is basically too much energy going into the mitochondria, and I think they can't keep up, and they have incomplete oxidation, and we get these incomplete intermediaries of metabolism that build up in the cells in the form of diacylglycerides and ceramides and some of these other things, and that leads to insulin signaling issues and then ultimately insulin resistance and so on and so forth. But I think that protein in itself, particularly eaten in conjunction with lifting, with muscular activity, is not driving aging. I don't think it's driving cancer. I think it's driving muscle growth, and I think that is a good thing. I think you distinguish that. Then when we look at the longevity studies, and remember, there's no real good human data at all on calorie restriction in human longevity. There are some animal studies, but as many people pointed out, guys like Don Layman and some of the other protein researchers, which are tops in the field, have said, a lab rat automatically overeats. I mean, that's just what they do. And when you restrict their calories, it's not restricting them from, what they would normally eat as a wild animal. It's a captive animal that would overeat, and you restrict them back to normal. So I think about the human eating normal amount of food doesn't need to restrict beyond that for the most part. I think that I think you should get enough protein, but I think you do. I mean, and I would echo Stu Phillips, Jose Antonio, some of these other guys that say that should be accompanied by appropriate activity. And so sedentary behavior is just a losing situation regardless of what your diet is. So I think you need a couple both. I don't think you can separate the two. I think that fasting for some people, if you're morbidly obese and you're starting there, that might be a good strategy for a while. If you're horribly diabetic, I think that can be a good strategy as well. I mean, there's literature that supports that. But I do think in the overall picture, the lifelong picture, once you start getting into this sort of normal physiology, I mean, eating enough protein, eating enough food, and not undereating is just as important as not overeating. So I think there is a sort of place to be. And I think a natural, a human appropriate diet is one that includes meat in there, and in some cases, a lot of meat, to maybe even to exclusively meat. And I am the, I guess, theoretically the face of this movement. I've always said, you've got to do, I'm very dogmatic about, because people say, I want to make carnivore successful. I want to be a carnivore. I said, I don't care what you want to be, just be healthy. And, and that's what you should want. It's not a club. It's not a team. You don't get a merit badge for eating ribeyes for a year. I mean, what you get hopefully is, good body composition and good health. And that is the goal. I mean, keep the goal the goal. Don't make some arbitrary things because some wacko on the internet only eats meat. I say that in tongue in cheek, but honestly, a lot of people get really good results eating a meat-based diet. They really do. But at the same time, I tell people, look, you should never just, you shouldn't turn it into an ideology like we see on the other side, on the vegan side, where it's all about, I can never have a morsel. And, if my food touches some other food that was touched by an animal, oh my God, I'm going to sue the restaurant. I mean, that's just craziness. There are legitimately a few people out there that, they can't tolerate really much in the way of plant food at all, and they get really sick. And I understand that, and I accept that, and I tell people that's what you need to do. That's what you need to do. Equally, I would say the majority of the people that have adopted this diet are about 95%. I mean, some of them will have an avocado here and there. Some will put seasoning on their food. Some of them will, every once in a while, have something off the plan. And at the end of the day, if they're doing well, I mean, that's great. That's great. So, I mean, what about what's happened in the last 3 years? I mean, I think, for whatever reason, and I'm not, there were guys doing this 10 years ago, zeroing in on health, and this other group, Charles Washington, and a bunch of others, I've mentioned them many, many times.
Yep.
They were the ones that kind of I read about and said, I'm going to try this. But, since I guess maybe just because of who I am as a physician, as a fairly, prolific athlete, or at least, in the sports I'm in, the needle has moved, in the local, and certainly in the low carb community, people are now like on the ketogenic diet. It's now the metagenic diet. It's a keto carnivore. It's a carnivore keto. It's carnivore plus an avocado. These things have definitely shifted. The acceptance for meat in that community has made a 180. I think they've gone, even Mark Sisson, who I've sat down with many times, has said, look, I'm only going to give myself X amount of food, and there ain't a lot of room for vegetables anymore. It's mostly meat based. And so he has kind of gone away from that big ass salad. I mean, this is like we all should. I mean, when the evidence changes, when the results change, when the thinking changes, you should, consider it as a possibility. And, the nice thing is now we've got David Ludwig from Harvard University doing a study on this. We're right in the middle of collection data for that right now. I mean, this is a huge thing. The fact that it went through the IRB and got accepted as ethical is a huge win, because now they're saying, okay, you can study carnivore diets now. And this is what we've been crying for. It's like, because the vegetarian vegan advocates say, well, there's no science behind this. Why are you doing this dangerous diet? There's no studies. Well, guess what? Now there's going to be studies. And if the studies show what I believe they're going to show, and I don't know that they will, but if they do, then what are you going to say? Well, we don't like that study. Well, that study was, what? I mean, you'll never, they're going to dig into their trenches and they're never going to concede. But, that argument that there's no studies will fall away, just like a lot of their other arguments. I think their ethical, environmental arguments or health arguments are falling away. And, and it's not my favorite thing to argue with those people, because it's like arguing with a wall. I mean, you're not going to change it.
Well, you would fool me based on some of your, some of your retorts and replies to some of the extreme responses that you get from some vegans who come at you. You like you said, you're not a wallflower, and it almost looks like you do enjoy kind of going at it with them. It's very entertaining.
I don't mind pointing out the idiocy or the sort of the misdirection or in that sort of stuff. But as far as going back and forth, I did that early on. And I mean, I always came to the conclusion that I just asked this question. I said, hey man, if your health depended on you eating an animal product, would you do it? And they would say no. And I'd say, look, I got nothing more to talk to you about. I mean, you're just not a rational person. But I mean, as far as, somebody puts up some silliness, like, meat is murder or some crap, and I'll just say, or, we're all the animals eat all the crops on the planet. And clearly this is not even close to being true. And I'll point out the other stuff and say how ridiculous or how stupid they are with that argument. But as far as like, spending my time, typing back and forth, like I did on Twitter when I first got into this, I just don't have the time for that, nor the desire.
It's interesting. You talk about how what's been going on over the past 3 years, how it's kind of gone from a ketogenic diet to a metogenic diet. It's, I mean, to the degree that, you're talking about someone who was a major fasting proponent, a guy by the name of Jeffrey Wu, who's the founder of the nutrition company HVMN. Mm-hmm. They make the drink components, right?
Yeah, the nootropics and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed him for our podcast, and he was even talking about the fact that he doesn't, he really doesn't do those 3-day fasts anymore. And on top of that, when I asked him about what's the ratio of his diet, protein to fat, he told me he eats mostly meats now. It's just incredible what's going on out there and how much steam this is gathering amongst not just those who are interested in performance, but really well-studied, well-researched people are looking at this, and they're saying that there's something to this, and it's not just the feeling I'm getting. It's actually, it's in the research. It's out there. There's massive anecdotal evidence on this, and now, as you're saying, there's going to be hardcore studies. I'm assuming that's not an epidemiological study; it's a proper study.
So it's not a interventional trial at this point. It's for the first one is just to see is it sustainable.
Okay.
And we want it's a sustainability, and then we're going to assess the health of those people that have done it for greater than 6 months. Once that's done, it's step one, and then you start looking at intervention trials. And so the first thing is to get it accepted as a reality in the literature, and then you can start doing the intervention trials. And so and I don't have any part in that study other than helping promote it, helping to find participants. But as far as, analyzing the data, I mean, I put some input in design. I showed them stuff that I had already done, and they're kind of mimic some of that stuff, as I've done, lots and lots of surveys in the population. But they did something very similar with the type 1 diabetics, this type 1 grit group, social media group that they did. And it was published in Pediatrics, which is a very high impact journal. And it was the #1 downloaded article in the journal. So I suspect the same thing will happen with this diet. It'll be very controversial. I'm sure guys like Neil Bernard and the PCRM will be lobbying whatever journal to publish it, to retract it, and all that nonsense of suppression of discussion. It's their idea is if you disagree with me, we don't want your voice to be heard. And I think that's very, very dangerous. And hopefully we realize that. You saw what happened when MeatRx came out in 2019 with their 6 studies in the Annals of Internal Medicine that said red meat is not a carcinogen. There's no evidence, so strong evidence to suggest it would be. And they lost their heads blew up, and everybody in the community is like, oh, we need to petition the FTC to force them to retract their article. And thank good for the Annals of Internal Medicine, they didn't back down. They didn't do that. They let the studies stand. I think that's important.
Looping back just for a moment as a segue into something else regarding fasting. I noticed that, I think you've mentioned something along these lines, that eating protein or eating meat, as far as calories are concerned, that it actually becomes self-regulating. I noticed that if I eat 2 meals a day, if I eat steak, if I don't because usually I'm doing 1 meal a day. The funny thing is, I'll do 3 pounds of steak in the evening. And I'm probably going a 22-hour window before I get there. So there's a 2-hour window left where I eat. But there are times when I will have a steak during the day. So say I have 1.5 pounds during the day, I find that I can't eat more than 1.5 pounds for that last meal. So no matter what I do, it seems like I'm ending up one way or another eating 3 pounds of red meat. And that's maybe just the place where I'm, but it's self-regulating. And my weight never goes up and it never goes down. And I don't know if it's the meat itself or the protein satiation, you might know better, but what I'm curious about is the reason I wanted to just mention fasting for a moment, because most people fast. Most people used to fast for longevity purposes because of that study about calorie restriction in the rats, and they live longer. So, okay, calorie restriction. But I've heard you talk a lot about longevity with respect to protein. So can you tell us your thoughts on the need for animal protein with respect to living a long life? Because that's another myth that needs to be busted potentially. A lot of the information we've been fed would have you believe that longevity is dependent on the elimination of meat and animal fats from the diet. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I would say there's no conclusive or strong evidence in human beings that suggests that in any way, shape, or form. In fact, we can draw we can, and again, I don't want to be too inferential here, but we know that strength and lean muscle mass is highly correlated with longevity. The Honolulu longevity study showed that adults in midlife that were in the upper quartile for strength had about a 250% increased likelihood of making it to 100 versus those in the lower quartiles. And so strength, again, obviously there's things that go into strength, there's training, but animal protein supports that better than any other source of food. This is clear. Animal protein is superior to plant protein. I know that plant-based advocates will say, well, you can mix and match and make it happen. But even in the cases, and there was a recent study that came out, even in the cases where you actually match, the essential amino acids, gram for gram, plant protein versus animal protein, plant protein still failed to produce the results, that we saw with animal protein, to the degree of about a 40% loss of, amino acids that's showing up, actually usable, that are bioavailable. And it has to do with some of the anti-nutrients that are in plants that kind of prevent the absorption and compete with the absorption. I think that, the one human data point that was done by Levine and Longo, looking at high protein diets in midlife, showing a negative correlation with longevity and increased cancer rates, was widely criticized and heavily criticized by, a whole host of, protein researchers, Stu Phillips, Don Layman, and a whole host of other guys. They wrote a nice long critique of that. And really what happens, they went through the NHANES data and they just either they cherry picked what they wanted, or they weren't clear on how to use the data, or they, just intentionally, did that, and then, the funny thing was, it was like, well, in midlife, you can't eat a lot of protein, but when you get older, you need to eat a lot more. And you saw that correlation, like for some magic reason, as soon as you hit 50 or 55, boom, you got to start eating a lot of protein, right, which doesn't even make sense. I mean, but that's the only data in humans, and all the rat studies out there don't correlate to humans very well. The fruit flies, the nematode studies, I mean, that you can't use that data to show it in humans. There's never been a study that I'm aware of that looks at an animal that eats a meat-based diet, a carnivorous diet. When you restrict their diet, there's no evidence that shows they eat longer. Now, there's studies in dogs. If you feed dogs kibble and you restrict the kibble, they live longer, but it's restricting their natural diet, which would be like a wolf, which would be a more carnivorous type diet. So that data is not even out there in animal data or animal studies. And, it's clear, there's study after study after study that shows that lean muscle mass, preserving that strength, correlates with longevity, function, absence of, protection from cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, diabetes, on and on and on. And so we know in order to get there, you need to eat adequate protein. You're not going to put on muscle when you're eating, 40 grams of protein a day, as some of these people might suggest, which is just abysmally low. The average American, 15%, I think 30%, 40%, probably better in my view. I mean, and I do think, and this is the other thing that people talk about, Mtor stimulation. Protein will stimulate Mtor, particularly leucine and to some degree arginine, right? These are amino acids. But what they fail to mention is that the bigger drivers of Mtor stimulation are insulin and then a caloric surplus. And so they just kind of disregard that. What's causing insulin to be high? Well, it's chronic eating. It's chronic eating every 30 minutes of, particularly these high carbohydrate snacks. We know the carbohydrates have a much more powerful effect on insulin than anything else. And so if we're eating a high carb diet around the clock, eating every 2 to 3 hours, our insulin level is going to be higher, and therefore our mTOR level is going to be higher. And we look at the people that eat that way. We look at you just got to go into a grocery store, look at somebody's shopping cart, and then look at them, and it's like, hey, it's not rocket science here. But I think there is, like I said, the nutrition science, in my view, is not well done. I mean, it's not that the people are not well-meaning. It's just what you're asking them to tell us, I don't think is answerable, quite honestly. I mean, there's, when people say there's no long-term studies on a carnivore diet and health outcomes, whether you're going to die, well, whether you're going to live a long life, well, there's no long-term data on any diet. I mean, there's never been a diet where we've actually tested. I mean, there's observations where, well, you think these people eat this way, and therefore, if we ask them to fill out a food frequency test, which 80% of the time they estimate fruits and vegetables wrong. I mean, right? What kind of crappy data is that? You're putting the crappiest data in the world in there and trying to make inferences, and then the output is some tiny relative risk change. You're making inferences based on that. I mean, it's really just kind of almost laughable that we try to use that for policy making.
So how did we get here? Because I was looking at some of the data, and I read one research note that said that in the 19th century, so in the 1800s, the average annual consumption of meat was anywhere between 150 to 200 pounds per person in the 19th century. And now, what it is today, I mean, they're recommending you don't eat more than 4 ounces of 4 ounces of meat per day. And so, like, how did this? How did we get here? How did we go from even in my grandfather's time, they ate meat. They ate lots of meat. So what happened? How did this happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, if you look, it's even worse than that. If you look at like the Eat Lancet Commission, who's got this global diet for global health or whatever they want to do, I mean, they're recommending 7 grams of beef a day. 7 grams. I mean, that would fit on your pinky fingernail. I mean, it's that's what they're allowing you, and it's like a 1.25 eggs per week or something ridiculous. I mean, it's just ridiculous what they want people to eat, and it's instead you should eat 57% of your calories should come from processed grains, sugar, seed oils, and soy. That is what we're being recommended. Now, if we look at the American diet today, the average American eats about 56 pounds of beef per year, which is about 2.4 ounces a day, which is a very small amount. Even in 1970, we were eating, we were now eating 56. 1970, we were eating like 95 pounds. And that's, like I said, I haven't seen the data we showing 150, but I mean, if you look at places like Hong Kong, which leads the world in meat consumption per capita, they're eating like 1.5 pounds of meat per day. They live longer than anyone else on the planet. They have the highest IQ of anyone else on the planet. Are they related? Is it strictly correlational? I mean, you could certainly make that argument, but I mean, it doesn't paint the picture that meat is the bad guy when you got the longest living people on the planet eating the most meat. I think when we go back to the origins of nutrition science, particularly in the U.S. back in 1917, when the American Academy of Dietetics was founded, I think that's what they were called back then. This is the origins of nutrition science. This was founded primarily by Seventh-day Adventist groups whose religious mission was to convert people to a vegetarian diet. And they started the nutrition science thing. They've been part of that in small capacity ever since that time. Even though during the World Health Organization 2015 declaration that red meat was a carcinogen, a class 2 carcinogen, just meat class 1, a significant percentage of those panelists on the IARC were Seventh-day Adventists, vegans, vegetarians for ethical reasons. That conflict of interest was never revealed. It was never admitted to. A committee who dissented, like Dr. David Clearfield, who said, "Hey, look, we got a lot of vegetarians on the menu on the committee. We should disclose that." And they said, "No, we don't need to disclose that." They frankly shut down any discussion that would not reach the conclusion that they wanted to reach. They dismissed all data that said that red meat is not a carcinogen. Thankfully, 29 MeatRx did a larger study and basically came out and said, "Hey, there's no evidence. I mean, there's no strong evidence. I mean, it's weak at best that red meat has any role in developing cancer, heart disease, or any of these other things it's been sort of blamed on." And so I think there's bias, from that part. And then, I think industry, seed oil companies, but going back to Procter and Gamble giving the American Heart Association $1 million back in the 1920s. That's a lot of money back then, by the way. Trying to just get their products in front of people, and they're very good at marketing and paying the right people and getting the message out there. Same thing with the sugar lobby when they sort of bribe Fred Astaire from Harvard to sort of demonize fat and promote sugar. I think there's just so many conflicts of interest there, and I think it's just who won the battle, who spent the most money, who was willing to pay to get their message out there, and we're reaping the benefits. And it's been an organized, systematic, sort of almost a brainwashing of a generation or two. Our kids are being exposed now to cartoons that say, "Oh, eating meat is bad for the planet. Eating meat is bad for the animal. You're hurting animals when you eat meat." I mean, it's on children's programming, cartoons. It's everywhere. And so we just have, I think, vested interests. I mean, I think when it comes to food production, animal products are expensive. They're expensive to produce. They're time consuming. The profitability is not that high relative to other things. And I think these big companies just want easy money, and they want to make profitable, cheap, highly processed food, throw some vitamins in there, say it's plant-based, and here you go. You're saving the planet. And it's just, unfortunately, it benefits their pocketbooks and not our health.
So there's been a lot of talk about um, laboratory grown meat, so lab grown meat. And first, I guess what I'm curious about is, do you foresee a time where, given all of the interests in keeping meat off our plates, and there's a lot of various interests, as you pointed out, a few of them, but there's a lot of interest and a lot of money in pushing meat off of our plates and substituting it with something else. And do you see a time, or do you foresee the real possibility of maybe 50 years from now or 100 years from now of there being no more, whether it's through laws, regulation, taxes, or whatever? Do you foresee a time where we will not have the right to eat meat, or it'll be taxed out of existence, or it'll be regulated out of existence in favor of meat substitutes and lab-grown meat? Do you see a time where that might come?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very plausible possibility, and it might be 20, 30 years down the road. I mean, I think if, Mark, if left to their own devices, I mean, even the major meat companies, the big meat packers in the US, Tyson, Cargill, Marfrig, and JBS, they are all investing in the alternative meat markets because, again, their bottom line is making money. They don't care what product they're selling. They just want to make the most money. That's business. And if they can convince the populace that this cheaper product is just as good or perhaps better, whether it's true or not, they're going to do that, particularly if they can make more money. So I don't see that being an unrealistic scenario at all. Now, the problem with lab-grown meat as it stands today is, the arguments that they're making for it, it's more environmentally sustainable, it's more ethical, so on and so forth, are complete garbage. I mean, if we look at the environmental side of it, or even the ethical side of it, right now it's dependent upon something called fetal bovine serum, and this is blood from a fetal cow. So the cow, in order to obtain that, they have to slaughter a pregnant cow, take the fetus while still alive, aspirate, blood from its heart without anesthetic, so it doesn't, mess with the serum. And then they put that in the media, and then they have to keep replacing that over and over again as these cells grow. And so, you have to keep killing all these cow fetuses. That's just to get the growth media so they have the right hormonal milieu to grow cells. And now we got to feed these cells. I mean, they just don't grow without food. I mean, our muscles don't grow without food, right? We know that. So what are you going to feed these? Where's the protein going to come from? There's not some fairy that flies in and sprinkles protein dust over it. They have to get that protein from somewhere, and where they're going to get it from are plant-based proteins that are grown from monocrops, soybeans, peas, whatever, lentils. So they have to grow that. They have to just degrade the soil to grow all of these massive quantities of protein, and realize that cows are turning grass, stuff that you and I can't eat, that just grows wild, into their protein, and then some of them are supplemented with grain at the end. But I mean, by and large, most of their meat is coming from grass. To make lab-grown meat, you've got to get that protein from these soybeans, these peas, or something else that you're growing that's going to destroy the ground, the environment. And then, remember, these cells don't have immune systems, and so how do they fight off infections? Well, they don't. So what do you got to do? You got to bathe them in antibiotics. People are complaining about antibiotics in a cow. If it's sometimes injected with an antibiotic, oh my God, we don't do it. But we're going to accept that we've got these cells that are literally swimming in antibiotics at least some part of their existence, perhaps the entire time. Certainly when they're in the bioreactor, maybe not, maybe it's sterile. But as soon as you take them out, you got to make sure they don't get infected, because if it gets contaminated, the whole batch has to go in the trash. And then you got to talk about, well, how do you fuel those bioreactors? Well, a cow is fueled by solar power. I mean, there's no, you don't plug a cow into the electric grid. I mean, they're out there munching grass, and with particularly these grass-fed ones. And now as we see these regeneratively grown cows, that's even a net carbon negative. I mean, we're putting the carbon back in the soil. So we're using fossil fuels. We're using, degradative agricultural practices. We're killing cows anyway. and we're less efficient. And, we might be able to get the price point down to where it's cheaper than regular beef, but at what cost are we doing it? And I don't think it's something. And then there's some companies say we might be able to do it without the fetal bovine serum at some point. We don't know. We don't know what those cells will grow into.
Mm-hmm.
And then also it's like, who decides what cells you put in there, what mixture, what are we going to include? Because they might be able to say, we're going to do it with no saturated fat. And maybe that's not a good idea. We don't know. I mean, it's, there's a lot of debate around that stuff. And so I have major concerns about that. I'm not going to sign up to eat that. I think you can if somebody wants to eat that for 20 years and we can see what their health outcomes are, they can run that experiment, because they're not going to do the experiments on humans. I can tell you that. Same thing with the Beyond Meat stuff. I mean, or particularly the Impossible Burger with the soy leg hemoglobin, which humans have never, ever eaten before in the history of Earth. And now we're just going to, we're going to do a rat study on it and say, oh, the rats didn't die, even though some of them did get sick, by the way.
Okay.
And they had kidney issues and some other things, but that's fine. FDL is clear for human consumption. We'll eat it for 10, 15 years. Meanwhile, all the dogs are getting dilated cardiomyopathy from eating the pea protein, but we'll put pea protein in Beyond Meat burgers, let humans eat it for 20 years, and we'll see what happens, and meanwhile, we've been eating meat for 3 million years. And, I think it's well tested that it's tolerated pretty well. But, like I said, we put high fructose corn syrup in the diet. We put Crisco in the diet. We put, all this other garbage, and, we're sick. We're a sick population, and it's really frustrating. I don't know. Sometimes it just pisses me off that I go to the store and there's so many damn sick fat people. And it's not that I don't like them. And I'm not mad at those people for existing. I'm just saying our society, our food production system has made that happen, and it's our fault. And we just don't want to do anything about it because we're too happy. Just give me my Krispy Kreme donut. It tastes good, and I'll be quiet. I mean, we placate the masses with tasty food, and as long as you've got the money and it's cheap enough where you can feed people food that they like, no one's going to complain.
Right.
They'll face the consequences later.
Well, I guess one person's utopia is another's dystopia. I sure hope that is not the future. But
it doesn't have to be. Yeah, I don't think it has to be, but I think if nothing is done, if people don't get off their hands, quit sitting on their hands, it could well likely be. I'm talking 30, 40, 50 years from now. I mean, I'll probably be either dead or demented by then, maybe not. Maybe I'll be kicking around at 100 and still going strong. But, I worry about my children and my children's children and that sort of stuff. And I think these are the guys that are really going to not know what. I mean, there are literally kids these days that start out and they've never had a healthy day in their life. I mean, they've been metabolically sick since in utero. And I mean, they, by the time they're 8 years old, they're morbidly obese or they're diabetic or pre-diabetic. And I mean, that's all they ever know. And are we going to have a whole generation of kids like that? I mean, I certainly am concerned that's an issue.
Well, I mean, there's, it's like every single argument against meat, it turns out that it's actually the opposite. It's actually in every instance, where they say meat is bad for you. I mean, you name it, all the chronic diseases that it's related to, supposedly they even blame diabetes, clearly a sugar, overabundance of sugar and carbohydrate issue, if it's not genetically inherited, of course, but can be exacerbated by, but I mean, even that they blame on meat. So it's like another myth that I'd love you to dispel, because I've heard you talk about it, is another one of the big issues that you hear is save the environment, save the climate, stop eating meat. And you're doing a good thing for the environment, you're doing a good thing for the climate. But once again, actually, it turns out from listening to you and the guests on your podcast, I've learned that actually cows can actually save the environment and save the climate. And can you explain how that works?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, we have to put things in context. I mean, this is the current situation. Through most of the world, well, I'll start with the U.S. So in the United States, 98% of our cows are finished in the feedlot. Okay, there are some negatives associated with that, clearly. However, when we look at the big picture with U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, there's other issues there, but the main one that people worry about with regard to climate change, saving the planet, has to do with raising global climate temperatures. And I know there's some people that think that's nonsense or whatever, but in the framework of that argument, if we look at EPA data, and you go to EPA.gov, you can get this information. Agriculture, in the entire agricultural sector in the United States, puts out 9% of our greenhouse gases. Of that, 5% is plant agriculture, 4% is animal agriculture, and then of that 4%, only half of that, or a total of about 2%, is cattle. So 2% of our greenhouse gases come from cattle in the United States. You contrast that to the transportation sector, which is about 28%. The industrial sector is about 30%. The energy sector is about another 27%. Those are the big drivers, the fossil fuels, and the animal agriculture is a small fraction. And so even the healthcare sector is 10%. So the healthcare sector is 5 times as much greenhouse gases as cows are. And so what argument I'll make is unhealthy people are not sustainable environmentally. So if you have people that are unhealthy, that are constantly patronizing the healthcare system, they're contributing and growing this greenhouse gas segment in the healthcare system. But when we look at cows, I mean, most of the greenhouse gases associated with cows have to do with methane. We see that methane has a higher global warming potential, somewhere between 28 and 30 times what CO2 does. But what people fail to mention is the half-life is very short. It's only up in the atmosphere for a fraction of the time that CO2 from fossil fuels are up there. Fossil fuels are up there for 1,000, 2,000 years, whereas methane may turn around within a decade, which seems like a long time, but it's a blip when it comes to the geologic time scale, or climate time change. And so we also know that when we calculate methane from cows and try to and the known sources of methane on Earth, we say cows and termites and natural gas and in wetlands and rice production, and some of these things, we're seeing that. What this is called a bottom-up calculation. So we say, well, we know we can measure how many cows there are and how much we can say an average cow is going to put out X amount of methane, and we can convert that to CO2 equivalents, and we can multiply by the number of cows that are known to be on the earth, and then we'll just come up with the number. The problem is they keep discovering more and more methane sources. It seems like every 6 months they say, wow, there's another huge methane leak that we never knew about. So the cow fraction keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we discover more and more things. And this is confirmed by atmospheric sampling, like people like NASA and some of these other organizations have done atmospheric sampling. This is a top-down approach. So what you do is you say, well, how much methane is in the atmosphere? We can measure that. And we know that methane in the atmosphere has gone up over the last 3 or 4 decades to a significant amount. But what they can do is they can take isotopic measurements. They can see, they can look at the different carbon skeletons and carbon isotopes and say, these came from rice, these came from cows, this came from cars, this came from natural gas, this came from here. And what they're finding is what's actually in the atmosphere is almost none of it this caused this increase is coming from cattle. So it's all these recent increases in methane in the atmosphere coming from these other sources that are not coming from agriculture. And it makes sense. You think about it, in the United States, we had anywhere between 30 million and 60 million bison roaming around, not to include all the elk and deer and all the other wild animals. We've had the same number of ruminants. And in fact, years ago, maybe, before the last ice age ended, when we had the megafauna, we probably had orders of magnitude more ruminants, animals running around, belching and farting. And we didn't have, runaway climate, temperature change. In fact, it was cold. So, it's again, it doesn't pass the common sense test just because we can't measure it accurately. So that is, kind of one of the things that we talk about the current situation. But if we talk about what is possible, which is a more exciting part, one of the things we look at is soil. How much soil is it? How much carbon is in the soil? And as we deplete our soils further and further, and some people will argue that we've got 60 harvests left and we're going to run out of soil. The topsoil has been eroded by 10 feet or something like that in some parts of the world. The only way to restore that topsoil is to put carbon back in the ground. And the most effective way to do that, and there are studies after studies that are now coming out, is by using animals in an appropriate way, in a regenerative way, where you herd them up, you have them all eat in one patch for one day, and then you move them. And you just keep moving them every day, once a day or once every 2 days, you move them. And what that does is it quickly restores the soil carbon. And in fact, Professor Alan Williams, who I interviewed not long ago, just gave me data showing that if the United States were to convert 40% of its herd, to regenerative style grazing, right now we're about 5%, but if we were to get up to 40%, we could completely offset all carbon emissions from all sectors of the United States. It's all the cars, all the natural gas, all the industrial stuff, all the energy sector. Just if we were to do that, and do we have land to do that? Absolutely, we do. In fact, by his calculations, right now we process about 30 million head of cattle a year in the United States to feed ourselves. We could easily do 50 million head of cattle, run in a regenerative fashion, and that's not even with stacked integration of animals where you run cows and then sheep and pigs and chickens and goats and different crops. So I mean, there's so much more we could do with that if we have the desire to do that, rather than saying, oh, we're gonna let these global mega companies feed us synthesized slop and pretend it's healthy for the environment when it clearly is going to destroy the soil.
That is unbelievable. I mean, that is so the actual truth is that if we increased the herd and we raised more cattle, then all the climate change issues that are discussed with respect to carbon emissions could be offset, and the whole problem, as some describe it, would be solved.
That's the gist of that. There are many people that say, and not only that, I mean, we look at soil runoff, topsoil runoff, and we look at water, desertification. What happens is when you have poor organic carbon in the topsoil, the rain doesn't absorb; it just runs off and it washes the topsoil, and it washes all the herbicides and pesticides out into the Gulf of Mexico. You get the dead zones. By doing regenerative style agriculture, you don't need any herbicides, you don't need any pesticides, you retain the topsoil, you don't have the soil water runoff. You would solve so many environmental problems if you did that. And yes, you could do it with more animals. In fact, it would lend itself to having more animals, which would then yield more food. And the other thing that's nice is it's actually more profitable for the rancher to do it that way, once they adopt that. And so more and more ranchers are seeing this. They're getting unplugged from the subsidy, herbicide, pesticide, big petrochemical companies to raise that stuff, because they take out these huge loans, they get sucked into the system, and they just kind of get stuck. But the ones that make that transition, that say, hey, look, I'm going to take a year or two, I'm going to not use herbicides, not use pesticides, I'm going to improve the pasture on my land. I'm going to make it more productive. These guys are I'm seeing guys, some of them are saying up to 800%, increase in their production capacity. They can run, anywhere, up to 8 times as many animals on the same acreage. There's guys that are, they're doing 3, 4, 5 times as many cattle on the same number of 500 acres that they had. And so that means 5 times as much meat, and more profitability for them and less cost, which is the really neat solution there. So again, that's my, understanding of talking. I've talked to lots and lots of guys in this space, researchers, people that are actually proving it and doing it every day. It's been anecdotal for years, but now the studies are coming in. Alan Williams, Richard Teague, some of these other guys that are, Roundtree, some of these guys that are doing, Jason Roundtree, all these guys that are doing this actual research, Will Harris at White Oaks Pasture, they are proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is a way to go. And I think this is something that more people, if you're going to be eating for the environment and you're like, well, I think I'm just going to eat plant-based because I think it helps the environment, that is a losing strategy. if you really want to help the environment, you would get behind it, particularly if you have the economic capacity to pick and choose your diet. Now, many people in the world don't have that. Most people that go on a plant-based diet in the world do it out of desperation. If you look at most of the third world, they're on a grain-heavy diet, and they pray if they can get an egg. If they get some meat or an egg or a little bit of milk, they're happy as can be. But most of the time, they're eating some cheap grain product. And but the ones that live in Western society that are out there virtue signaling about how healthy they are and how much they're protecting the planet, if they really wanted to protect the planet and make a difference, they would get behind this regenerative animal agricultural system.
That's absolutely fantastic and mind-blowing. I want to switch gears for the rest of our time together, and I want to talk about you as an individual, as an inspirational individual, because you're a very inspiring guy, and I mean in like a genuine way. Like, you're not getting up there giving these big motivational speeches, but the way you have, again, you're the de facto face of this movement, right? I mean, it's just happened, and it's hard to say, oh, this person's the leader of it. I mean, you clearly are the key proponent of this message, and you're also a very physical individual. Like, I see you train when you post on Instagram, train like an animal, right? I mean, and you've been a competitive athlete and a world record holder. I think, if I've got this right, you hold world records in the 500-meter row. You've competed in powerlifting and strongman events. You've played semi-professional rugby in New Zealand, I believe, where you faced off of some of them big boys on the All Blacks. And you continue to train to this day. You're training at a very intense pace. And I think you're still chasing some world records out there. So what drives you to compete first? What drives you to compete in sport?
I think it's some degree of mental illness. I honestly, I don't know. I think, probably maybe because I didn't get into it early enough, I didn't get burned out. I mean, there's some people that, they're so successful athletes early on, and I've trained with Olympic champions, and I see these guys, and they reach the pinnacle of their life success at 27 years of age. They set a world record, or they medal in the Olympics. And then nothing they can do will ever reach that. Then they give up. And since I never had that, I'm always trying to say, I'm not going to give up yet till I reach my goal, whatever that goal may be. And it always seems to change. I guess it became part of my identity at some point. I kind of got used to being the athlete that's, I mean, for good or bad, it's part of my self-worth, I guess, is what I feel like. Is when I'm successful as an athlete, successful physically, I just feel better about myself. I also, I guess I've got a little bit of stuff to prove. I mean, I'm like saying, hey, I'm on a meat-based diet, and guess what? You can be pretty damn good as an athlete. And so I sit there and kind of give the middle finger to people, say you can't do that. And I sit there and I do it regularly, pretty much every day. And like I said, as somebody who's in their 50s, or in his 50s rather, I try and sort of say, look, there's no reason to be limited. I truly believe, I try to walk the walk. I mean, when I say, I don't think, aging for the most part, for most of us, should be associated with disability. I just don't accept back pain, a big belly, sore joints, low energy, low libido. I don't accept that as normal. And I don't think anyone should. And so, like I said, if I'm going to say that, I want to at least sort of walk the walk, because there's a lot of people that talk the talk, as you know, and then you look at them, you're like, well, why aren't you taking your own damn advice then? So, I mean, if like I said, I think it gives me more credibility to sit there and say, look, you can be healthy, strong, and fit. And yes, I'm actually doing that. And so what I'm doing is actually working. And so I actually, honestly, when I'm in the middle of training hard, I feel good. I mean, this is when I feel like I'm alive. I mean, it's kind of like, there's certain things, certain parts of life where I said sometimes life doesn't start till your heart rate reaches 100 or whatever, 150 sometimes. It's kind of like, it's you just feel invigorated, whether you're running from a bear or you're training to break a PR or something, you're sprinting, that feeling is just hard to top. But yeah, that's what kind of drives me.
So I mean, you clearly have a competitive nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I do. It's almost pathologic.
Do you see that? Does that spill over into like the way you approach? I mean, I see it. I actually can see that it spills over into how you approach social media. Because again, I've seen you go after people that mess with you. But what about in business? Does your competitive nature, did that spill over into, for instance, when you were an orthopedic surgeon? I know you were in Afghanistan. Yes. I listened to that interview on Joe Rogan with you, where you talked about like the absolute madness of the trauma center that you were working in there, where you were fixing, people who were coming in blown half to hell. But you before all this, you were like an orthopedic surgeon at a high level. Like, were you just as competitive in that space?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the hospital I was at before I left, I was the busiest surgeon in the whole hospital. I did more surgeries than anybody else. And it wasn't that I was just rushing through surgery, but I mean, I just worked. I had a huge work capacity. I was like, yep, I'll do another one. Yep, I'll do another one. I made sure that my team was efficient. We turned around. We didn't screw around. We got it done. In Afghanistan, me and my partner, we did more surgeries than anybody else. We were like, we always keeping running numbers. We're like, who's working the hardest? And it's just kind of, it's just whatever. And even now in the business I'm in, I'm constantly looking at numbers, metrics. I'm comparing where other people are, and we want to beat that. I mean, I don't know. Some people I guess it was like Michael Jordan or something. They'll compete in anything. It doesn't matter. Yeah. I do have that about, I like to succeed. I don't mind, it's not about, like I said, there's certain things I don't care about. I'm not going to compete about those things, and sometimes that frustrates people because they're like, well, you only care about this, and there has to be a line, or you can't, otherwise you go crazy. I mean, there's things that you really, things that I have control over, especially things I have to control over, like my performance, physical. I have 100% control of that for the most part. It's rare that that something will prevent me from, and it's just the only limitation is myself in that regard. And so that is very easy to compete in, where there's things where, you're at the will and whim of other people or unforeseeable events. It's a little more frustrating, but at the same time, I think the same principles apply. It's consistency over time. It's, trying to do the best you can over and over again. And that's what I'm doing with this MeatRx company that we've got. I am every day trying whatever. I'm probably, you see my social media is a lot about just trying to move this company along, because my goal for that is to impact literally millions of lives and for the better. And I mean, I generally am in this business I think we need an alternative to the way we're approaching health in this country. And I think the healthcare system is failing abysmally. I mean, and it's obvious to everyone around, including, both the patients and even the physicians. They know. I mean, they're in there going, this system sucks, but what else can I do? I've got a, $250,000 in student loan debt. I've invested 15 years of my life. I can't do anything else. I'm trapped. Because there's no real other alternative. And I, like I said, I am, trying to make an alternative for myself. It's one of those things where if you don't like the game or the rules of the game, sometimes you got to make a new game, and that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
So you mentioned MeatRx. Can you tell us about your business, about MeatRx? Like what is MeatRx?
Yeah, well, it's evolving, what it is right now and what it's going to be in 5 years, or hopefully two very different things. But myself, I was approached by an entrepreneur out of Silicon Valley, who's my CTO. Her name's Masa Rostami. She's a data engineer, AI engineer person, very bright, very hard charging entrepreneurial spirit. And she went on the Carnivore Diet and reached out to me and said, hey, look, and I was involved with another group that we were doing some things, but she said, look, I am very motivated. I am, I'm the person, and I said, okay, we'll see what happens. And we founded this thing back in July of last year, and we launched when my book came out on November 19th. And, we said, well, we're going to start out, providing a platform for people that want to do a carnivore diet. We want to provide, feedback, support, resources, even some coaching for people that need it, because, the information's out there. It's out there freely available. And I tell people that, here, just go look at the FAQ. It's free. And there are people that, they just need support. I mean, there's a lot of people, we know that support helps. Long-term compliance and success often depends upon support. And a lot of people, if they go on a carnivore diet, they don't get any family support. They don't get physician support. They don't get their friend support. And a lot of time, all they get is, oh, you're going to kill yourself, blah, blah, blah. And so having this place to go to, this community that we're building, which is growing by, it's thousands of people now and growing every day, is really, helpful. And then, where we're going from here, we're going to, like I said, I think meat is central to the diet. We're going to expand our scope a little bit. There might be some more low carb keto stuff in there, and continue just to, have a good support platform. And then, hopefully we can help to guide policy, and we team up with the ranchers and the providers of our producers of food. We're going to have some mobile, like on-demand stuff that I think is going to be helpful for people that are, really need immediate support. We've got, some other stuff with data collection where we're going to be looking, like my thought is, and, based on my experience, is that this is a powerful intervention on treating many health issues. And I think that if we can start to demonstrate that this, for things like autoimmune disease, diabetes, mental health issues, GI issues, is more efficacious than the standard of care. And, oh, by the way, it's 1/100th of the price. It's like a fraction, 1% of the cost. That is going to be a powerful market, and I think you're going to see maybe major employers, maybe UPS or Dell Computers or Boeing or some big players that said, hey, wait a minute, we're spending whatever, 20% of our annual budget on healthcare. Mm-hmm. We might be able to reduce that by 90% and get better results. And then, you partner with them. This is the long game, because I think it's coming to that. I think people are seeing the healthcare system is failing. It's sick. I think it's great for certain things. If I get in a car wreck and my femur's sticking out of my skin, don't feed me a ribeye steak. I mean, take me to a damn hospital and somebody, put a rod down my femur. I mean, those things we still have to have, but I think, and I see so many physicians. We've got 100 physicians that have joined our platform, and they all see the same thing I do. It's frustrating. It's not that the doctors don't want to do it. Some of them don't have the education or knowledge, whether it's diet in general, lifestyle in general, but most of them just don't have the time. They don't have the tools. They're not given the time. They're not, they're not incentivized to do that. They're told to see as many patients as you can in your 8-hour shift. Don't forget to document everything, code everything appropriately, and make sure the billing department gets the bills on time. I mean, this is, and the administrators are there trying to, tweak that system and cram more people into the system. And, we'll give you these fancy electronic medical records so we can, figure out how to further monetize this stuff. But I mean, it's really kind of taking the heart and soul out of what medicine was, why I went into it 20 some years ago. And I think, I just think, the patients see it. I mean, the patients get tired. I mean, they go to the doctor and it's like, well, the expectation is I'm going to get a new pill if I'm in particularly, dire straits and I don't feel good. Or, I go there, I'm frustrated, and they just shuffle the pills around. We'll try this pill and that pill. And it's inextricably, I mean, the healthcare system is inextricably tied to pharma. And I don't think it'll ever change. Mm-hmm. So I think I don't think you're going to be able to fix that system internally. I think you just need a new system. And that's part of what I'm doing. You're seeing a lot of physicians are just leaving. They're no longer employed. They're hanging a shingle out on their own, a virtual shingle. Many of them are doing health coaching. They're getting away from that because it's a bureaucracy. It's so much administrative hassle. It's literally, it's gutted the heart and soul of medicine. And I don't think you should go to a doctor for I hate to say this, but I don't think they're very good at health advice when it comes to like diet, nutrition, lifestyle, getting healthy. I mean, they're okay at, and they're very good at, depending on what it is, at sickness. If you're sick, they can make you feel better, at least temporarily, or if it's just some traumatic situation, they can sometimes save your life. But man, if you're looking for advice on long-term quality of life, I don't know that the healthcare system is the best place to go.
And you coach as well, I think, on MeatRx. You're actually coach. Am I right? Are you still coaching people if they want advice on the carnivore diet? If they're
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's more than just, sometimes it's training, it's exercise, it's lifestyle, because I get a lot of people that are attracted to the fact that I'm an athlete and they want to be athletes and know what I do, and guys in their 50s wanting to get, in good shape again. And I get a lot of doctors that come to me and professional athletes. And I do that some. I mean, I suspect as time goes by, I'll have less and less time for that, just because,
yeah.
as our company gets more and more successful and larger, I'll have to spend more time doing that. But I'm doing that for now. I generally do it. I generally spend about 2 hours a day in doing that. I've kind of blocked off 2 hours a day, which is fine. And I really enjoy it. I love talking to people. I love seeing them, their eyes light up when they kind of get it. And I love seeing them, 6 months later or 6 weeks later, when they're like, wow, look at all the good stuff. And that's, again, this is where I saw early on the value, and not that I'm the first person to discover this, but the value of the story, and the powerful connection people have when they see somebody. Hey, I could be that guy. You see somebody, it's nice to read a paper. Most people don't have the time or quite honestly, the knowledge to read a medical paper and know what the hell it's about. They don't get inspired by that. But if they see somebody that looks like they do in the mirror, and they see them go from here and what's possible, they say, why can't I do that? And that's why we started out with Meat Heals, and now we've converted to MeatRx, and we've got so many success stories, and we have all these videos, and we're just documenting over and over again until we saturate it. It's like, until we're just wearing people down with success. It's kind of like, yeah, you can keep denying it until the millionth person says, I got healthy doing this. And I think that strategy is certainly paying off. I mean, it's why one of the reasons I got where I am is just by saying, look, I hear you. I'm listening to you. I'm listening to my patients. I'm listening to my clients. As a physician, I learned a lot from my patients. And there's some people out there that don't think that is appropriate. That you should, the patients don't know anything, everything. And I just disagree. I think that's how medicine started, with observation. And if you've got people coming in and telling you, I went on this crazy diet and my knee pain stopped hurting. Maybe the first 2 or 3 times you hear it, you might sort of disregard it. But when you start seeing that 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 times, it's pretty damn hard to ignore. And so there has to be something there. And I think this is where the science slowly catches up. And it's got to start somewhere. You use an epidemiologic study to draw your hypothesis, or you can use a case report. And, for those people that say that it's all anecdote, well, that's true. But at the same point, you can still make that hypothesis, and you don't need a formal study to change your diet. I mean, you don't need your doctor's permission to change your diet. I mean, your doctor doesn't give you permission to eat Twinkies and ice cream. You don't need it for that either. So if you're going to cut that crap out, you shouldn't need to go to the doctor to not eat junk food.
And MeatRx is also set up to train others how to be I guess it's a health and lifestyle coach. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things is, we've kept it all on the platform because our eventual goal, again, is to collect data to, determine if our methods as they are actually efficacious, and find out how successful we are in managing this. And so my goal is, maybe by next year, we'll have enough coaches train enough clients where we can say, okay, what is our success rate with, say, psoriasis? What is our success rate with, say, rheumatoid arthritis? What is our success rate with weight loss, with diabetes, with hypertension, with so on and so on, with depression? And then we can say, okay, and then we can start publishing some of that. We can team up with some researchers, start formally collecting data. But it's important to have everybody doing the same thing so we can monitor them. We can say, and I literally every single day am talking to the people that are coaches. I have a weekly meeting. We have coaches come in there. We talk about any concerns. We try to keep everybody on the same page. Not everybody's going to be 100% exactly the same because they all have different backgrounds, but the message is generally fairly uniform. And I want to know, because I think if you're going to attract, a big company, you need to have a sort of consistent, a consistent method.
Hmm.
So you can say it's reproducible.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, that's powerful. It's a powerful business model. Uh, Certainly because you're providing, you're 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 fulfilling a gap. You're fulfilling a desperate need that's out there. And anytime you can do that with passion, obviously that's the stuff of legend. That's the heady mix that really makes for incredible success stories. You've all and I don't want this to go by without talking about the book, The Carnivore Diet. I mean, the book that you've written, that is now, that's the Bible, right? On the carnivore diet. For the uninitiated, what will, if they pick up The Carnivore Diet, your book, what will they find in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for that. I do think it's a good resource for people. I mean, I wrote it when I was writing that book, and the publisher actually approached me to write. I didn't sort of say I want to write a book and then find a publisher. The publisher came and said, "Hey, do you want to write a book on the carnivore diet? We've heard a lot of feedback, and people want you to write it." So I wrote it, and I was just thinking, who am I writing it for? And so I wrote it for kind of the average person who may not already know this stuff. And while there is quite a bit of scientific reference in there, it wasn't a scientific tome because I think the science is just too fluid. I just don't think.
Mhm.
I think one of the things we have is we'll look at a study and then 3 years later that there's a new study that refutes that previous study. So I didn't want to get. It was more a lot of sort of just sort of thought. My thoughts and what we know from historical evolutionary data, what we do seem to know about the science, what it seems to help with, all the different diseases, why it seems to help, what's going on pathologically, and why does it seem to fix these things. Of course, we have some of the success stories in there just to kind of show you this is real life people. And then it's a lot of how to, and because there are issues that people will run into, particularly in the transition period, and how to deal with it, why it may be occurring, what are the common fixes, how to incorporate it over the long haul. How do you transition away from the diet? How do you modify the diet to your needs if you need to modify it a little bit? And then just a lot of reference stuff, like handy reference stuff. But that's really the overall. And I put the publisher wanted me to put my sort of autobiographical bit in there. So the first chapter is just a little bit about the background about me and why I came to do what I'm doing. And some people have really enjoyed that part. Like I said, I didn't want to put it in there at the beginning, but they said, yeah, we want you to put that in there. So that was the beginning. But I think it makes, unfortunately, I use a lot of common sense in there. And I think that, for some people they say, well, you can't just use common sense. You need a scientific study. And I just kind of point this thing out. I'm saying, look, this is just intuitively obvious. It's empirically obvious. It is, and it's testable, and this is the thing. You can just test it on yourself and see if it works. And I'm not particularly dogmatic about it. I get people that are out there saying, well, I really wanted to be a carnivore, but I couldn't make it work. And I'm like, I don't care what you do, how you want to label yourself. I want you to be successful in your goal. I mean, you keep the goal the goal. My goal is not to only eat steak the rest of my life. My goal is to be healthy, vigorous, athletic, functioning well, good long health span, be happy. That should be, I think that's a worthwhile goal for many people. And, if your goal is to align with this particular philosophy, regardless of what the results are, then I think you've got the wrong approach. I think, like I said, I don't care if you achieve your success physically and mentally, eating another diet. That's great. If it works, it works. I'm just saying that this is an option, and honestly, a very healthy option, a much more healthier option than we were led to believe. And I think, again, if this is a fad, it's going to go away, then it'll go away, and that's fine, and it should. But I think what's happening is people are getting results, and they continue to get good results. And at some point, people want results, and I think that's it's nice to have a diet where you don't have to stress, you don't have to plan and plot and be anxious and spend hours a week meal prepping and planning and cooking and then just not getting the results you want. It should be easy. I mean, any other animal on the planet, any wild animal on the planet, he doesn't need a calculator. He doesn't need a Fitbit or a fitness tracker. He doesn't need a sleep monitor. I mean, it should be, I think humans are no different than any other animal in that regard with our requirements. I do think we overcomplicate it, and we've kind of created a diet for us, that is not human food, quite honestly. And I think if we get back to that, and it could be an all meat diet, it could be meat plus a piece of fruit here and there, and I'm totally fine with that. But I do think there should be a diet that is that simple, and doesn't require any more thought than breathing.
Two more quick questions for you before you go. You've taken on the mother of all tropes out there. You talk about dogma. The meat is bad dogma is like it's a mountain and a half to climb, and somehow to the uninitiated, you do it with aplomb, and you do it in a way that seems like you can conquer all of these challenges that have been thrown at you with respect to the naysayers and the doomsayers, and most of the official bodies as well that line up behind it. Yet you're kicking ass and taking names and making this a super popular movement. And so what would really be helpful for anyone who's looking to kind of strive in life is, how do you deal with challenges like that, whether in business, whether as a doctor, whether just in life in general? Like, how do you personally view challenges and overcome them? Like, what's your philosophy on that?
Well, I mean, first I have to believe in what I'm doing. If I didn't believe what I was doing and have results to back it up, then I wouldn't be there. But I mean, I think that just like anything, I mean, it's just consistency over time. It's just, like I say, every day I wake up, I don't have scurvy. Is another day of victory, for against the naysayers. And like I said, I'm very much in their face, saying, look, hey, I'm not dead. I've got not what you said was going to happen hasn't happened. And not only is it me, I don't take a day off. I don't miss an opportunity to capitalize. I mean, I realize that this is a multifaceted fight. It's not just about research papers. It's not just about social media. It's not just about athletics or anything. There's propaganda you have to dispel, and sometimes you have to use your own propaganda. I guess I realize that this is a fight, and I realize that there are no rules, and I realize that you don't bring a knife to a gunfight, and so I think you've got to fight back in a way that that you can compete with your opponents. And so I'm, like I said, there's some people that really get offended by the fact that I'm aggressive and sometimes, use the F word, or sometimes I, go after people fairly aggressively. But at the same time, a lot of people appreciate that. And a lot of people will tell me, I wish I had the courage to do what you did. You're saying what I want to say, but I'm afraid to say it because I've got a big social media presence and I don't want to alienate some people. But I don't really think I had too much to lose. I felt like, I've kind of created a space for me, and now it's just you either go big or you go home. And so that's what I'm doing. And so whether, 5 years from now, we'll see where things all shake out. I strongly am optimistic about where my position will be. I still think that we still are going to have a huge uphill fight. But the nice thing is there is a tipping point. And I think once that tipping point is reached, I think you can really move the needle in a big way. And I think we'll approach that in the coming years. It's going to take a couple of years of And the other thing is I got a lot of help. I mean, I early on realized that this has to be a grassroots. This has to be a horizontal spread. It can't just be a one guy vertical deal. And so there are, if for some reason, whatever, I get assassinated by vegans or, whatever, some craziness or something, and, uh, that it's not going away. This sort of, the toothpaste is out of the tooth, out of the toothpaste tube, or the genie's out of the bottle. I mean, there's too many people that have experienced this. And, like I said, while I am happy to sort of, lead the charge to some degree that I can, I realize that I'm not indispensable. I think, there'd be people, dancing a jig if I keeled over and died. I know that, but I mean, hopefully that won't happen. But you never know. I mean, like I said, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and I am not opposed to the idea that I could potentially be wrong. And if I see something that unequivocally proves that I am, then I'll change my message. This is a thing. I'm not married to any dogma, but I do like seeing people get results, and that's what I'm seeing. This is, as a physician that has been helping people, for decades now. This is the most gratifying work I've ever done, as far as the number of lives I've impacted, and not just in a moderate way, but in a big, huge way. I mean, there's people that are like literally, disabled completely, out of life. I mean, they've basically checked out of life. They are, just, suicidally depressed, and that goes away. And that to me is, I mean, that gets me up out of bed every day, that's happening. So I think that's another thing that gets me charged up, is these success stories and the people that I interact with pretty much daily saying that, man, you've changed my life. And, in a selfish way, that makes me feel good.
That's amazing. That's amazing. One final question. You've been a leader, certainly in your practice as a surgeon. You're chief of orthopedics. You've been in the military. You've led this movement. You're a CEO and a founder of MeatRx. As a leader, what do you find to be the most important qualities for you to successful leadership? Qualities or traits that are
Well, I mean, I think that, and again, there's a lot of different leadership styles. I value pretty much everybody that's around me. I mean, I listen to everybody. Some people have really stupid ideas, but I listen to it anyway. And, if it's appropriate, we look into that. I like to lead by example. I try to, like I said, you see me out there, it's coronavirus lockdown. I'm not sitting there on the couch watching Netflix. I'm out there getting better. I try to, again, lead from the front, lead from example, try and encourage people. I want everyone to be successful. People that I lead, it's not important that I'm successful. I mean, it is, but I mean, I want everyone to be successful to the capacity that they can be. I'd love for everybody to be, whatever their goals are. But I mean, goodness, I mean, it starts, the first thing you do, and I think this is a message that we should have for the country. I mean, if we want to, play politics and Donald Trump's going to say, make America great again, well, it starts with a healthy populace. And I think if you have a sick, disabled, depressed, overweight population, you're never going to be great. By definition, you're not great. And, again, I don't play politics. I don't get into that stuff very much because it's too darn distracting. Right. But I mean, I think that has to be, so I like the people that work with us at volunteer. We are all, the nice thing about what I do at MeatRx is pretty much every person to a T has experienced the diet, has had a life altering change, and they're passionate about it. And it's very easy to lead passionate people, because they want to see the growth. They want to see the success. Our success is their success, and their success is the success of their loved ones, quite honestly. And so that is, it makes the job easy. And again, part of attracting the right people. We just have positive people, and in the rare occasion we get somebody that is not, positive, we just say, look, it's, maybe you're a better place somewhere else. And so it's kind of somebody taught me, my father-in-law once taught me, he said, If you want to change somebody, if you want to change a person, change the person. You know, you're not going to change who people are. You know, you just like, yeah, this guy's going. If they demonstrate they're this way, and you want them to change, good luck. You know, you better just cut your losses early and move on, and just part ways on good terms, hopefully, and go from there. But I am, very fortunate that. I got a lot of happy people around me, it makes life easier. This is a thing. I can't, that makes leading an organization of happy people is pretty damn easy to try to help lead. I can say that for sure. I think we're seeing happier people with this diet.
That's powerful, man. That is so powerful. Dr. Baker, where can our listeners find you?
Well, at MeatRx.com, I am there every single day doing a video session. I host a video session. We have anywhere from 50 to 100 people on video chat, so I can answer questions directly every single day, Monday through Sunday. 7 days a week at 9 a.m. Pacific. MeatRx.com, you can join for free, at least for the first month. I'm on social media at Instagram, Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKER, 1967. I do a YouTube video on my channel, Shawn Baker, pretty much most days. And then Twitter, SBakerMD, and that's kind of where I'm at. And then of course, I am available for consultation. There's a link in my Instagram bio if you want to do that. But yeah, as long as I can do that, like I said, I suspect I'll be able to do it at least for the rest of this year, and then maybe I won't be able to do it anymore, depending how busy we get.
That is absolutely awesome. The conversation was extraordinary. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Alpha Human Podcast. Really, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Lawrence, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I like to ramble a lot, so thanks for indulging me. Anyway,
the pleasure's all mine, and it's been super interesting. And I love your podcast. Love the content that you put out. So we're going to keep looking for more. And we're hungry for it, man. We're hungry for it. So keep giving it to us.
Well, we'll try to keep feeding everybody. Yeah, and we've got the Human Performance Outliers podcast. Another one I do with Zach Bitter. Good podcast, some good guests, some good information. I learn a lot too. That's the fun thing about having a podcast. You learn.
Exactly.
Yes, which is cool. Anyway, all right. Well, I got to run, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baker. Take care.
All right. You down? Okay.